School of Medicine at UCLA. And she's also the director of the UCLA Addiction Medicine Clinic. After her residency training, also at NYU, she completed a fellowship in addiction psychiatry at Cedars in 2006. She is active in the American Academy of Addiction Psychiatry, where she serves as the executive on the executive board of directors. So after Stephanie's presentation, Larissa will come up and they will have a discussion about addiction and some of the issues brought up in Stephanie's talk. After that, we will have a Q&A. On your way in, you should have received an index card to write a question on. If you didn't, we're going to pass them out after Stephanie speaks. So please write your questions for either Larissa or Stephanie on the card. We won't take any directly from the floor, and we really appreciate your cooperation with that. Also, I want to direct everybody to our website, friendsofthesemelinstitute.org. You'll find a calendar of our upcoming events. Our next Open Mind will be on March 19th, when we will welcome author Sarah McBride, who wrote the best-selling book, Tomorrow Will Be Different. Also, I hope you've been watching the screen. We have some other exciting events coming up, including our annual fundraising event, the Wonder of Women #WOW Summit, where we have speakers such as Maria Shriver, Ava DuVernay, and many, many more. So I hope that you will all join us for that. It's on April 11th, and we're very, very excited this will be our second Wonder of Women Summit. So we hope to see all of you women and some of you men there. For those of you new this evening, this is part of the Friends of the Semels Open Mind series, which brings together renowned authors such as Stephanie and experts in psychiatry and neuroscience such as Dr. Larissa Mooney to present programs about mental health issues here as a free service to the public. And if you have not already joined our community of supporters, we hope that you will, much like NPR, which is how we found Stephanie. We function much like a public radio station in that if you feel that our programming is worthwhile, we hope that you will help support us so we can continue to bring speakers like Stephanie Wittels Wachs here to UCLA. So without further ado, I'd like to give a warm UCLA welcome to Stephanie Wittels Wachs.
Thank you. Wow, that was such a lovely intro. Be my hype man. Thank you guys for coming out on a Monday. That seems really hard to me to leave your house on a Monday. So I appreciate you being here. So I want to start, just clear the air here. You could probably intuit from Vicki's remarks that we're having a cell phone problem. Yeah, okay, we're good. You got it? It's cool. Anyone else need to turn their phones off? It's like that thing where you're like, oh my gosh, is it me? So I've had a really shitty 5 years. Anyone else? Anyone else in that boat? Show of hands. Great. Okay. I'm no scientist, contrary to public opinion, but I'm willing to bet that in a room full of humans, 100% of us are either currently in the shit, just getting over the shit, or a product of past shit. So it's almost like the shit is part of it. You know, it's part of life. So if this particularly grueling period of time for me was made into a movie, I'd call it The Darkness. And for the sake of getting on the same page, I just want to define what that is. It's an emotional black hole. It's empty and lonely and draining. It doesn't care that you have to take your kid to school or that you have to go to work. All it cares about is that warm space between your mattress and the covers. We will all go through it at some point for a variety of reasons, often again and again. So we're not talking today about how to avoid it, talking about how to deal with it once it strikes. In my dealings with the darkness, I've found that time alone does not in fact heal all wounds, like the saying says. The passing of time certainly has a significant role to play, but in the short term, I find it to be unreliable. When a nuclear bomb is dropped on your life that changes you on a cellular level, it can take months, years, decades to emotionally recover. And as lovely as staying in bed for decades sounds, really, really great, the dog has to be walked. So today I want to sort of talk about how do I continue to do all this stuff my life demands while also feeling like shit. Couple of disclaimers before I begin. First, I fully advocate feeling like shit. I love it. It's great. Love feeling my feelings. If you've read my book, you know that. So, in fact, the very first step in sort of moving out of this darkness was to embrace that this is where I was, to wait around in that toxic waste for a good long while, and to be okay with that. Second, I would be remiss if I didn't sing the praises of professional help. Thank you, professional help. I have a diagnosed anxiety disorder, and I've done therapy over the years. I've taken all kinds of medication. I love it all. It's great. I wish we could all come out of the shadows about that. But in my experience, therapy is, even in the thick of it, like 3 hours a week. So there's 165 other hours. So, what to do with those hours. So what I have found is that at some point you have to sort of start to move forward before you are ready. In Judaism, when someone dies, mourners are instructed to sit Shiva for 7 days, right? You put the dailiness of life on hold, and you focus exclusively on this complicated work of grieving. And what I learned recently is that at the end of that 7 days, you're instructed to get up and literally take a walk around the block. Even if you don't feel like it, which you won't. Even if you're not ready to face the sunlight, getting up and moving forward before you're ready is part of the process. And as a theater director, it's part of the creative process. There's a director I love. Her name is Anne Bogart, and she wrote this book called A Director Prepares. And in it, she says, I make decisions before I'm ready, which I love. She says that when she's in a theater like this, and she's in the back of the room, and she's looking at actors on the stage, and they need her guidance. That's what she's there for. But she's tired or uninspired or hungry or whatever the case. Instead of just sitting there and waiting for the answer to magically fall in her lap, she starts walking towards the stage before she's ready. And in that cross, from her chair to the stage, something happens. Like the simple act of just getting up and moving forward jumpstarts that creativity. So when your life comes crashing down, which we're going to talk about in a minute here, there's never going to be a right time to get out of the chair. There's just not. You're not going to want to do it. So, for me, writing became the way that I was able to get out of that metaphorical chair. Giving myself in the thick of my grief something to do, being just brutally, candidly raw and honest while I did it, and very unfiltered, and then sharing that raw, unfiltered mess with others is what brought me here today, showered and dressed, instead of stuck, shaking, and rocking in a corner somewhere. So ironically, the stuff that, in my experience, before everything came crashing down, as a human in general, the stuff that makes me feel stuck is the stuff inside my own head. It's that negative self-generated feedback loop. And the root of it is fear because, much to my dismay, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict the future. I can't predict 5 minutes from now. And every time I log onto Twitter, I am met with this sinking sensation that the world might actually end at any moment. Everything is just deeply, deeply out of my control. And that lack of control creates fear, and that fear produces anxiety, and it pushes me out of my body into my head, and I live by myself in my head, all alone. And the worrying becomes the thing that I do instead of doing all of the amazing things that I want to do. So it, totally keeps me stuck. And when I wrote this book, at the time, I was teaching acting. I had the privilege of teaching acting for a decade to amazing, talented kids at the Performing Arts High School in Houston. And the basis of my work with them was about following your impulses and trusting your gut. And this was really critical because on a fundamental level, acting is about taking action. When you break it down, it's not called thinking or feeling, it's called acting, and it's about doing things. And a good actor is like a sponge. They're absorbing everything in a scene and they're responding to it truthfully right there and then in the moment. But that's easier said than done, because in order to do that, you really have to get out of your head and listen. And listening is actually very hard. To not be focused on what you think should happen or what you expect to happen, but to actually just be present in whatever is happening. So I'm terrible at that, okay? Because it's really hard as a human being to live in the moment. It's hard not to write, direct, and star in the elaborate movies in my mind. I have mental file cabinets full of them. One of them began in 2013 when the home pregnancy test revealed 2 little pink lines. And my husband and I were so excited, and the production crew in my mind got to work. They created this amazing Academy Award-winning movie featuring this glowing postpartum mother and her perfect newborn baby just sort of gliding effortlessly through life while strangers oohed and awed at us. And, where this is going, unfortunately, they absolutely got it wrong because 24 hours after our daughter Iris was born, she failed her newborn hearing screening. And 2 weeks later, sitting in an audiologist's office, hooked up to all these wires and electrodes, we found out that she was born with a permanent hearing loss in both ears. There was no cure, and she'd have to wear hearing aids the rest of her life. So I'm a new mom. This was not the movie in my mind. This was just not it. And the part that made me just the most frustrated is that the story had been written for her without any input from us. And there wasn't anything I could do to change it, And that was a lot to take in, so I fell into this darkness. Around that time, my amazing brother came to visit and meet his new niece. And she would sleep on his chest on the couch for hours, just like they were a statue there. And I was still reeling from this diagnosis and cried through most of his visit, but it was really good to have him on the couch, just to kind of look over at him and know that he was there with me. And at one point he looked at me like only a sibling, really a little brother can say, and get away with. He's like, man, you are a mess, He's like, this is just the most depressed I've ever seen you. Like, you gotta snap out of it, lady. Like, this is not a problem for her. This is a problem for you. Don't put your shit on her. She's never gonna know any different. And then she's gonna get her hearing aids and she's gonna be fine with that too. Okay? So you're the one with the problem, not her, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, whatever. And unfortunately, he was right, because the first day, after 6 weeks of just tears and wallowing and feeling totally victimized by, the circumstances of the universe, she got her hearing aids, and I realized that this was like a really good thing. Like, she can hear. That's the point. And I couldn't fix it, but I could do that. So that felt good. And I was like, okay, so I can just keep doing things. That will be something that I can do to help. So I got her in speech therapy at 5 weeks old. She was the youngest baby. Truly, a 5-week-old baby in speech therapy. And the speech therapist told us to talk to her, constantly. So I was just like, crying and like talking to the baby. And then we found out that hearing aids weren't covered by insurance, that they were considered cosmetic. I'm sure some of you have experienced that. And that was not going to work. So me and 2 other moms worked tirelessly for 3 years 2 legislative sessions. We drove back and forth from Houston to Austin. We testified in, I don't even know how many Senate, House committees and subcommittees. I took Iris with me. I put her in her little cowboy boots. She was 2 at the time. And I marched her around, and I made her shake hands with every elected official and use her words. And I said, this is what hearing aids do. And I wrote op-eds and YouTube videos, whatever. Anyway, as of September 2017, Texas did become the 23rd state in the country to mandate insurance coverage of hearing aids and cochlear implants for kids under the age of 18, which was awesome. Yes. So it was amazing. We just bought her a new pair recently, and I was so excited to put that bill into action. It was awesome. But once I was able to do this kind of stuff, instead of just kind of like wallowing alone in my head and feeling sorry for myself, the storm clouds started to lift, and I was able to just relish in this incredible child that I had created. My husband had nothing to do with it. I'm going to take 100% credit. She really is just phenomenal. And when she was a baby, like I would pray that she would just be normal. I was like, I just want her to have a normal life. And fortunately, that's not the case. She's not normal. She is totally weird and extraordinary, like an extraordinary weirdo in every sense of the word. So yeah, it's that first year of her life, we did the normal stuff. We bubble blowed and flower picked and sang songs and she happened to wear these hearing aids, but it was fine. My mind sort of started to shift, and I'll never forget that 1-year speech evaluation that she passed with flying colors. The audiologist, told us that she was ahead of the curve, and I remember being elated. And it was actually the day before my birthday. And we were at the evaluation, and I went to change her diaper afterwards, and the phone rang. And if you've read the book, forgive me, this is going to be a repeat session for you. But I looked at the phone, and it was an unknown LA area code, so I pressed ignore and continued to deal with the diaper. And it rang again. And my heart just sank because I knew what was waiting for me on the other end. So Harris, who gave me the great advice, was a TV writer, like Vicki said, here in LA, and also invented the word humble brag. Don't know if you knew that. And he was on the show Parks and Rec. He played Harris, the animal control guy. His resume is so long, and if I told you all the incredible things he did, we would be here until next week. So I will just leave it at that he was the funniest person in the world. And aside from being that, he was also a drug addict. And he had been in and out of rehab several times over the last year. So from the time that he called to tell me that he was a drug addict to the day that he died was 2 years. And that first year, it was all, opiates and pills and OxyContin, and then he started using heroin, and once that happened, it took 6 months, and he was gone. And I remember hitting the ground on the bathroom floor and just metaphorically staying there for a really long time. And I remember waking up the next day in tears, and I thought, how is it possible to awake from a sleep state in tears? I was like crying in my sleep. And the only thing that kept me going, or that got me out of bed at all, was this baby. I had to get up. I had to keep going for her. And at the time, she would only nap in the car. Parents, you understand this. And so I spent so many hours in the freaking car, in parking lots and in the driveway. And I couldn't be on social media at the time because it was like a landmine. You understand if you've ever gone through anything, like social media is just like the worst place in the world. And so I would occupy my time by pouring all of the toxic waste out of my brain into my iPhone notes app. And it's funny because Harris used his notes app to write jokes. I used mine to write the saddest things that have ever been written in the history of the world. If you read the book, you'll know that to be true. So there was so much of it, and writing it down, it didn't make me feel better because nothing made me feel better, but it didn't make me feel worse, and it gave me this concrete place to put it. I was like, I'm going to drown in it. There's too much, and so I just started writing this essay, and at some point, my husband suggested that I publish it online. Did you know you can do that? You can take your thoughts and feelings and put them on the internet. If you didn't know, you're welcome. Turns out you can. And so I had nothing to lose at this point. I was just The Walking Dead. So I did it. And I sugarcoated nothing. I didn't have any filter. I mean, I still don't, but this is 4 years later, so this is good, actually. And I just put it all out there. And I didn't know who would read it. I didn't think anyone would read it, honestly. But I thought if anyone read it, family and friends, maybe that they would understand why I wasn't answering the phone or taking a shower ever. What ended up happening was unexpected and sort of magical. I put this thing out there, and this just massive community of strangers came out of the internet woodwork to share their own stories of grief and addiction and loss and suffering. And it was amazing. It was like the first time since my brother died that I didn't feel so alone, in the sea of internet strangers. And it was like this sense of connection that I didn't even know I needed until it showed up. One of the people who reached out was a literary agent, and she asked me if I had any desire to turn this essay into a memoir. And I was deeply ambivalent about that. But I said yes because I was writing so much and it had become so therapeutic for me. I would put the baby to bed, and I would put on pajamas at 7 and get in bed and write for 4 hours. I just was what I did. And so I thought, okay, I'm not focused on outcomes or final products or results, but this is a way to exercise demons and process these events and try to preserve memories. When you lose somebody, you get really afraid that those memories of them are going to go away. You can't create new memories. So I was really paranoid that I was going to lose the ones that I had. And so it was really imperative that I got them all down on paper. So over the course of this year, after my brother died, I wrote this book in real time. And as I wrote it, unbeknownst to me, I started to heal bit by bit until it got to a point where I could effortlessly get out of bed and eat solid food and go to a birthday party with my kid and genuinely laugh. And after a year of feeling like I truly wanted to die, decide that I wanted to live and really, really actually live, not go through the motions. And so I made these major life changes. I quit my teaching job that I'd done for a decade. I opened this space. I launched this nonprofit. I wrote this book. And in May of 2018, we welcomed our second child into the world, a baby boy named Harrison, after my beloved brother Harris. So Harrison is, like his sister, absolutely perfect. I invite you to view my Instagram for photographic evidence of his perfection. Just truly adorable. Like his sister, he also has permanent, unfixable hearing loss. His is in one ear, unilateral. Hers is in two. Hers is moderate. His is profound in one. Totally different. Structural. His is structural. Hers is genetic. Yes, it's really, why ask why? I don't know. I wish I could tell you the second time, it was no big deal. I took it all in stride. That's a lie. I was devastated. But I did sort of have a manual for how to move through the shittiest thing again. Let's do it again, let's put on the boots and go through it. like the buzzword is resilience. Like, I'm really fucking resilient. Like, I have a lot of it now. And I knew that I could do it. So I wallowed and cried and cursed the world and all of that. But I simultaneously did the game plan, and I took the action. And instead of suffering in silence, I, again, put it out there. I posted this just truly horrific photo of myself on the internet nursing the baby. Like, I just looked like a truly crazy person. And I put several paragraphs about how hard this was and how hard it is to bring a person into the world. It's really hard to bring a person into the world. Ladies, yes, and men too. And also just how devastated I was about this news that we had gotten and how disappointed I was about it. And right after I posted it, I had this desire to delete it immediately, because it's just easier to just post adorable baby pictures and relish in all of the likes and heart emojis and all of that. But that's not the whole story. And what I have found is that not sharing the whole story is another way of keeping yourself stuck in that dark place. So I put it out there, and man, within minutes, my phone was just blowing up with calls and texts and dings and pings of people being like, "I love you, let me help you," and this village showed up again. So like I said in the beginning, it's been a shitty 5 years, but it has also been really meaningful. I started this amazing little family. Again, check it out on Instagram. We are cute. I opened this space where people create things, all day long. I got to come here and meet all sorts of great people that I wouldn't have met otherwise. This is really what it is, what life is. It's horrible and wonderful, like the title of the book, and sometimes all at the same time. And while I'm certainly not one to tie things up in a nice, neat little bow, I will say that at the end of this darkness movie, this imaginary film version of the last 5 years, there is light, there is hope, even though the hits keep coming, right? For me, this period ushered in this profound growth and development. This is a real cliche, but when something like this happens, you do realize that our time here is very, 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 very short. And so I was motivated to start living with some purpose and intention. I found this voice, and I used it to write this book, and it resonated with other people, and it made them feel less alone. And that's honestly just about as powerful, I think, as it gets. So speaking of powerful, I'm going to end with this little story about Iris, the powerful Iris. I told her the other day that I would like for her to stop growing, because she is just big. She's like a giant human. She's 5, but she's big. And she informed me that if she wanted to get new grown-up teeth, she had to grow. Whatever that means. So I was like, well, I don't want you to get new grown-up teeth. It makes me sad because it's going so fast. And she looks at me, with this intensity and her big eyes, and she said, "Mom, it's going to be okay." She said, "It's not the end of the life." And I was like, that is the point. It's not the end of the life, right? The darkness, all the bad stuff, it's not the end of the life. It's just part of it, So we can let that hold us back, or we can just get up and keep walking even before we're ready. So thank you, guys.
Stephanie, thank you for, I'm going to quote you right back, your raw, unfiltered mess.
Thank you.
With all of us.
I'm a raw, unfiltered mess.
Beautiful, funny, poignant talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that we heard you on NPR.
Thank you.
I'd like to welcome up to the stage Dr. Larissa Mooney, who is an associate professor of psychiatry here at UCLA, at the David Geffen School of Medicine here at UCLA, and also the director of the Addiction Medicine Clinic here at UCLA. And Stephanie and Larissa will have a discussion, and then if you have questions, please write them down on the cards, and we will come and collect them and give them to either Stephanie or Larissa.
Great. Thank you very much. So wonderful to hear your perspective on what you've been through. And I will say I really enjoyed reading your book. I found it very relatable. And as an addiction psychiatrist, through that lens, really certain things struck me in reminding us that addiction does not discriminate. It can happen to anyone. Unfortunately, it can have a tragic, fatal outcome. And in treating patients with addiction, I'm not very good at predicting who is going to do well in treatment, be able to maintain sobriety, who will have a much more difficult time. And so many factors go into that. And at the same time, I love what I do, and I find it very rewarding to help people through this difficulty. So a question that I have for you is, having seen your brother go in and out of treatment facilities, what was that like? And were there times when you had a lot of hope, times when you were losing hope, and what made that change over time?
I call it an equal opportunity destroyer. That's what it is. It's a beast. It is a roller coaster. I mean, everyone says that, and it's such a cliche, but if you're on it, that's what it is. It's like you can't get out. It's like you're strapped in. You're on a roller coaster against your will, really. And it was really crazy because Harris went into rehab the first time when Iris was 1 month old. So it was like we were dealing with the hearing stuff, and then Harris went into rehab, and like that was February 21st, and he passed away the next February 19th. So he was in rehab 3 times, 30-day programs. I was really angry with him. But I didn't want to show him that I was angry with him because I was like, okay, I have to play this role because I don't want to sabotage him. Like I was like on eggshells. And so I was like trying to temper that and vent to my husband, or, I say in the book, like Harris became the defining characteristic of my entire family. It was like everything was, have you talked to Harris? How's Harris? When was the last time you talked to him? It was like the Harris show, just 24 hours a day. And it was like a nightmare. It was a nightmare. And, he would get out of treatment and I would be supportive. And then there was this one time where he, I talk about it in the book, he was supposed to come home for Thanksgiving. This was the November before he died. And he called that day that he was getting on a plane and was like, I can't come home. I relapsed again. And I just lost it. I just went insane. Like I worked in a school. I described the scene in the book. I was just screaming. Everyone left the office. I was, I mean, I was raging. I've never screamed like that. I'm not a screamer, but I was that day. And then he came home in December. Finally, he got home, and he was so sick. I remember. I will never forget. He was so sick. I remember thinking it was like the Basketball Diaries, if you saw that movie, but worse, and he was physically like shaking and throwing up, and he couldn't control his body temperature, and I was like, it brings me tears thinking about it. It was so awful. And I just remember thinking like, oh, okay, this isn't about me at all, actually. Like, he has a disease. Okay, so he's not just an asshole. He's, like, sick.
Yeah.
And that was a really significant moment in the process. And so then again, I was just, like, trying to be supportive. And like you said, you can't predict who's going to...
Right. Or what
I imagine it's really frustrating and hard for you. I mean, I couldn't do your job.
It's, again, I mean, I love it. I find it very rewarding, but yes.
But don't so many of them relapse?
Relapse is very common. And It may happen once or twice. It may happen over and over again. And what works for one person doesn't always work for another. So it's really about my role as a facilitator and working with people to try to find a plan that's going to be most helpful for them.
Well, yeah, and I think it's hard, like, for families to not think that it's their fault, you know, or for parents. Like, my parents, my dad specifically, felt like it was his fault, and you know, I would always tell him, like, I was his best friend. I was in it with him, you know. So if it's anyone's fault, it's mine, and I'm not going to blame myself because, like, it's. I mean, I don't know. I think it's hard not to do that dance where you're like, what could I have done? And at the end of the day, nothing. I think nothing, unfortunately. Which is, like, really hard because you guys from the talk, you can see I'm a doer. I like to do things. I want to have solutions. So it was really difficult to be like, I can't help him. He has to do this. And, you know, I don't know. It's you can hear I'm still like, it's been 4 years and I think, like, what could we have done? How could it have turned out differently? Could it have turned out differently? I actively.
Right.
I was just talking to you about it.
What
could
just giving support and trying to help the person find the right plan for them. Exactly. I'm happy to take questions if they're ready, unless. We can open it up.
One question. We'll just spend a long time on it. I'll just talk really slowly.
So this question is, what medical literature is available detailing new best practices for addiction treatment? Is the model still 28-day inpatient, then outpatient with AA and 12 steps? Actually, this is a question that we were talking about a little bit
just talking about
before we started. And the literature varies depending on the addiction. And in some ways, they're all the same in that people can successfully do well in treatment. Relapse is common across all substances that cause addiction. And we have different treatment options depending on the addiction. So for alcohol use disorder, opioid use disorder, we do have FDA-approved medications that can help reduce chances of relapse, that can help somebody maintain abstinence. For all addictions, we have evidence-based behavioral treatments, certain kinds of therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy for relapse prevention. 12-step and AA can be a source of support for anyone with an addiction. It's free support groups, meeting with people who have similar struggles, hearing their hopefully inspirational stories and also realistic stories. And so that can complement any treatment plan. Being a part of that community. There's even 12-step meetings for family members of people struggling with addiction, Al-Anon. So the best plan is often a comprehensive one with therapy, also treating any mental health problems, psychiatric disorders that the person may be going through. May need a doctor, a therapist. Initially doing something more intensive and then followed by something less intensive is a common model. Not everybody needs to go into a 28-day program, so it really depends on the person and what they're going through when we try to think about the best plan to put in place. I'm not sure for your brother if that changed or the recommendations changed. It sounds like for him he was repeatedly offered to go into inpatient treatment.
Yeah, I have opinions about 30-day programs, that they don't work. That's my opinion. I am not a doctor. But I don't know. What struck me after each 28, 30-day program was that Harris felt really great. It was like sort of a new high, the high of sobriety. And that is a dangerous place for an addict because he was like, all right, now I can just use a little bit, just one time. And when we went to visit the treatment, the last place he was in a 30-day program, and then he transitioned into a sober living. But he conned them, because he was him, into letting him leave to go write for Master of None, because he was writing for Master of None at the time, and he had gotten Aziz Ansari's show, and he had gotten, has anybody seen that show? Okay. Yeah, it's great. So Harris wrote on the first season, and he was supposed to play Eric Wareheim's role. Eric Wareheim played Aziz's best friend, so Harris was going to play that role. And like on his laptop, the Airbnb for New York was like on the tab. Like he was planning to leave to go to New York in a couple weeks. I'm rambling. The point is that his psychiatrist at that facility told us that the thing that kills most addicts is the just one more time mentality. That it's like, I'm just going to do this one more time. And that's the thing that kills them. And for him, every single time he got out of a 30-day program, he used that day. That day. And I know that because when you die and you don't expect to, your stuff is everywhere. And his journals that he did in rehab talked about relapsing every day that he got out. So it seems like a longer term program to like, if you're going to do a program, let's just try to rewire your brain and to like give yourself some time. I see some people nodding. It seems like there's some people dealing with this too in the audience, obviously. That's my totally uninformed, non-medical opinion.
And the thing with opioid addiction is overdose is a real risk. And you may relapse on cocaine, and actually there are many scenarios in which relapsing on anything could be fatal, but there are certain substances that are more likely to be fatal. And so it's true, being in a 28-day program, the advantage is you're kind of removed from your environment, and it can be a place to get a foundation. But the real question is what happens when you leave and when you're transitioning back to real life. Yeah. And how do you maintain some of that structure and really have an optimal plan? Because it's much easier to stay abstinent in an inpatient facility. But then when you leave, it's suddenly back to real life.
Yeah.
And that is the riskiest time for relapse and overdose.
Summer camp for Harris. He was like, woohoo, there's a chef. I can just hang out, not have to write. I can just be here and totally.
Right. Yeah.
What about, what do you think about the safe use or the group use sites? There, people are going
safe injection sites
where you're not using alone. Because a lot, like Harris died alone. A friend of mine who I'm working on a project with right now, her brother died alone. It seems like that's the thing. So is there any data yet about those places?
In the United States, the example you give of a safe injection site is called a harm reduction approach. And so the model is for someone who's not ready or willing to get treatment, meaning they're not able to or interested in getting on medication treatment, which for opioid addiction really is the gold standard. Medications like buprenorphine, naltrexone, brand names are called Suboxone, Vivitrol, and methadone are FDA-approved medications that give the best chance of minimizing the risk of relapse. It doesn't mean that people on medication don't relapse. It's just they give the best odds. But safe injection site is, where there's a supervised injection place. And in other countries that allow this, actually in the United States, there's a couple of cities trying to do it, and they're either in the works or they've been shut down because we're more of a abstinence-based model in this country. But in other countries, they're more accepting of this. We do needle exchange here, but that's different than
very different.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of in light of the opioid epidemic, push to be more open-minded and come up with creative ways to minimize harm and risk. And that's what it can do.
And they have helped in other countries?
Yes. Yes. And they can buy time. And the goal is to move from that into treatment, but not everyone is willing to get treatment or ready for treatment at the moment that you think that they need it, but so it can minimize harms. Yeah. Okay, Stephanie, I read your book and I loved it. I cried through it. Thank you for sharing. How will you teach your children about addiction and their uncle?
Wow. Thank you for saying you loved it. That would be really terrible if you said you hated it. Stephanie, I hated your book. So my daughter is obsessed right now with death. Like, she constantly talks about her Uncle Harris. She sings songs about him. She's begging me to go to the cemetery to see the grave. Like, she's really in it right now with this topic. She's weird, I told you. And that's a really good question. I think that when the time is right, I'm going to be really candid about it with her. I mean, I think I have to be. I think with the little one too. When I get home, he's 9 months old. I'm going to sit him down. I'm going to say, Harrison, got to talk. Yeah, I don't think it's too early, honestly. I mean, 9 months is too early, but I think that, like, it would make sense to be open about it. We're open about everything in our house. This is kind of the way that we're going to do the parenting thing, or that we have done it. Right now, she knows that he was sick. That's what she knows about it. And that he died. And that's complicated, too, because then she's like, well, are you guys going to get sick and die? And and so it's like, well, no, not until we're very old. Well, Uncle Harris wasn't very old, so why did he get sick and die? So it's like this fine line. And then our dog died in the middle of it all, so she was like, there's just been a lot of, like, bless her heart. But, I feel like, I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist. You tell me. It seems like the fact that she's talking about it openly, that she's curious about it is good. That she's not wondering about it by herself and coming up with her own stories about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're going to say, he took the stuff that made his body sick. And we do talk about putting good things in your body. We talk about that now. We talk about with nutrition, if you eat that, the sugar is going to be bad for your body. You're not going to be big and strong. It's going to give you sugar bugs on your teeth and whatever. And so maybe you want to eat an apple instead. And so I feel like if we can frame it like that, that's so hard. Yeah. What am I supposed to do?
Right. It sounds
Can
like
you tell me the manual?
Age-appropriate ways, but also being honest.
Right.
But using age-appropriate language in a way that a child can understand.
Yeah.
And it sounds like as she gets older, you would be able to share more.
I mean, there is a genetic component to addiction, correct?
Yes, there is. It's give or take about 50% of vulnerability is genetic. What that means is if you have two parents with addiction, your odds are even higher.
Right.
But it means also you could develop addiction without parents who have addiction.
Right.
So there's also environmental factors, trauma, abuse, having psychiatric disorders increases the probability. Why is it that some people can use a substance recreationally or once in a while and not go on to develop an addiction?
Yeah. I talk about that in the book.
Yeah. Alcohol
I was
is
recreational. Yeah, totally.
So,
and then, and Harris said to me one time, like, I'm mad at you. Like, how come you didn't turn into an addict and I did?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a complex. And then also the changes in the brain from use of substances themselves also facilitates that process. But it's different in different people. Mm-hmm. Let's go on to the next question. For Stephanie, were your parents involved in your brother's addiction and your loss. We've covered some of that. I don't know if there's more you'd like to add.
Yeah, I mean, we travel as a pack. We're really close people. They live 5 minutes from me right now. It's like they're very involved. Yes, my parents. My parents as parents growing up were very involved. Parents, and we were all in the thick of it with Harris. We were all in the disease place with him. My parents would travel back and forth, from LA to be with him. And that Thanksgiving, for example, that he missed, they did it with us, and then they flew out the next day. My mom made him an entire Thanksgiving meal, in his house. I mean, they were great parents, and that's why it's like doesn't matter, It's like you can have the greatest parents and still
And a close family and
very close family.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say that, if you've lost somebody, it does change the dynamic of your family. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's a hole. It's a constant source of pain.
Yeah.
My dad, he developed Parkinson's really, like after Harris died. I think he probably had it, but once Harris died, he retired, and it just kind of came on like with a vengeance. And so, but it's been rough. My mom does a lot of advocacy work. She, to this day, she goes to speak in schools. She writes about it a lot. She's really on the front lines of talking about addiction and trying to change the narrative around that. She started a support group in Houston called GRASP. It's a national group for people who have lost their children or siblings to addiction. And so she started the Houston chapter. And unfortunately, every week it keeps growing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was at the first meeting, there was like 5 people there. Now there's dozens.
Yeah. Well, more people to be helped and find that support.
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
That are coming forward. Mentioned 3 30-day programs. Is it possible to find recovery in a 30-day program? How can insurance companies change? It takes so much longer. We're having coverage issues. It's true. A barrier to treatment is always going to be getting it covered. How do you pay for it?
It's so expensive.
Quite frankly, the price of the program is not, in my opinion, correlated with the outcome, meaning a more expensive program is not necessarily better.
Nope.
Or the quality of treatment. That's not what determines the quality of treatment. Navigating the treatment system can be very confusing, a lot of mixed messages, a lot of misunderstanding about, and then also this model of doing the same thing over and over again. If it's not working, why aren't we changing the plan? So what I do advise people, if you're having issues with, insurance coverage, at least get opinions of clinically licensed professionals about what you or your loved one needs, and then find at least the best thing that you can get covered. I mean, if extending the stay somewhere is not happening and you can't afford it, maybe step down, but build a different plan. Maybe it's an intensive outpatient program and working with a doctor. But yes, longer-term treatment is generally better, but the way that treatment looks may change over time. So just going and having a detox and leaving will almost invariably fail. Mm-hmm. I mean, relapse rates are very, very high. Mm-hmm. So the treatment may change over time, but staying in treatment is what's important. Stephanie, did your brother struggle with mental illness? And I'll pair another question together with this one. And was he treated for it during or after treatment? Mm-hmm. And then there's a second question for me there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah. Like, who doesn't have mental illness? I mean, like I said, I have an anxiety issue. Harris had a depression issue. I also think being a TV writer, although very glamorous and fun, is also really stressful. And he had a lot of rejection, and he was working like 18-hour days and having to generate content and be on all the time. And so I think that in conjunction with, he was on and off antidepressants as a human being. So, yes.
Yeah. And part two, Larissa, how do you feel we should be treating the root cause of addiction, which may be mental illness, depression, anxiety? That's a complex question, but an important one. What I will say is, there's this chicken and egg thing. What comes first? Sometimes the depression, anxiety, the idea of self-medicating with substances. And if you really talk to people in their timeline, other times you meet people who really can't identify with that model, that for them maybe it was purely social and feeling like, if anything, they're self-medicating, social anxiety as opposed to, some kind of more physical anxiety or depression. So everyone's narrative will be different. They do often go hand in hand, or at least using substances can make these issues worse. They can, cause depression or exacerbate depression or anxiety. But the most important thing is that we treat them all at the same time. If whatever came first or second, or maybe which thing is driving the other, we tend to get the best outcomes when we treat everything concurrently. So that more integrated model is where the field is going. Another question for youth who are using narcotics: how long of a period of use is needed before brain receptor changes occur, making treatment with a Suboxone, methadone, or the other medication choices, naltrexone, a necessary treatment adjunct? Also, a complex question because we don't have those exact figures. And there's so much individual, I would say, variation. Even in the course of addiction, you will meet people who say, from the first time I used, rapidly lost control, and then I was using a lot of other substances too, or almost anything I touch, I quickly develop an addiction. Other people, it's a much slower course. Why is that? Where they say, for years I kind of used socially, or maybe I drank a little more than my peers, but it didn't seem like a big deal. And their real addiction may start later, maybe after a big stressor in their late 20s, 30s. It's so variable. So I don't have an answer that can answer this for everybody, and also not really a good crystal ball for knowing. I've, of course, met people who have successfully maintained sobriety, even from opioids, off of medication, or who have come off of their medication. What we can say is that it is recommended as giving the best chance of, especially together with a comprehensive plan. So someone who's younger, which is really the nature of this question, I would say that the decision about going on medication really should be made in conjunction with a doctor, looking at what has been their history of relapse, what is the severity of their addiction at this time, and just because they're young doesn't mean that we wouldn't recommend a course of medication as part of as a tool. Okay, next question.
I'm just like, these questions are breaking my heart because I'm just thinking about, you guys. I feel like there's people here that are struggling with this, and I'm just sorry. It's just, it's so hard. I'm just really sorry if you're struggling with this. Mm-hmm. Ugh, it's just the worst, isn't it? It's terrible.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Is substance use disorder or alcoholism a cause or symptom of underlying sense of inadequacy, shame? I can't read that word, but something about identity, etc. If so, must treatment address these underlying issues? So yeah, I think there will be lots of different narratives around that. I'm curious if you have some to share about your brother, but in treatment we do try to address those kind of personal issues in therapy, trauma issues that people are struggling with or have histories of, and how is their substance use being used as a coping strategy. It can really quickly numb out the pain. It can, in some cases, make you feel really good really fast, or at least just get rid of the pain. So, yes, in a comprehensive plan with one-on-one or group therapy, we do try to address those issues as it's not just about not using.
Like
other thoughts about
shame
that?
or Harris was very confident. Like, see his friends over there. I'm like, let's talk about Harris's confidence. Yeah, like it was truly unparalleled. So yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I do think that there was, like, there is the greatest story that is in the what's it called? Preface of the book that Aziz writes. He said, I have to share this. There was an email that went out to all of NBC, the entire company-wide email, to every employee. And it said there's a mandatory sexual harassment seminar happening in the morning. You need to be there. Everyone's required to be there. He hit reply all to everyone in the company. Will the bagels be shaped like pussy holes? The entire company, guys. Every single person in the company got that email. I was just like, when I'm like, can you explain Harris? That is how I would explain it. Like, that is how he was. There was no, like, he just was this very brave, you know, like when he was 14, he rented out a theater and they did this comedy show and he walked across the stage totally naked. He had a cowboy hat over. Were y'all there at that show? Yeah, like put a cowboy hat and strolled across the stage. Like just just totally like risk, taking all the risks, which is probably partially why we're in this position. Like he just was fearless. Really a fearless human being. Did he describe what using did for him? Did he ever? No. Mm-hmm. That is an interesting question. Blowing my mind a little bit. No. I'm trying to think. I know we talked about like him. Harris was just like, he was always like working. I think I turned him off. Like it kind of like slowed the wheels down for a second. Because I think there was just a lot of stuff going on. So I think it was like a necessary, or what he felt necessary, kind of like to check out for a second, you know? I know that's kind of like how it started. I don't know at the end how it ended, but yeah, I think that was some of it.
Yes, and that's true that the description of kind of what drives it in the beginning may change. Even a lot of people will really remember those initial highs, and that's classically what you think of when someone's using drugs or alcohol. They feel euphoric. But in the throes of addiction, they're actually just using to feel normal. And they will say that. I feel so bad when I'm not using. I kind of need it just to function, or I need it to feel normal. And they may even be able to say, I hate using. I hate the way I hate that I need this and that I can't stop. But it's such a compulsion, and it's no longer this kind of decision about whether or not to use. It's just a need throughout the day, kind of like a drive.
I do very much think that the person who hated Harris the most was Harris. Like, he hated that he was using. He wanted to be sober. Yeah. So bad. He really did. You know? It's just, yeah.
That's a very common.
Really, truly.
Common,
I mean,
then that's packaged with the shame and the secrecy.
That is true. Yeah, feeling like a failure. You know,
Yeah,
I mean, you feel like a failure. It's like you feel like you can't face your parents or your family, or, you know, you feel ashamed.
Yes, and that's where lies can come in as well. And that
yeah.
can be part of recovery, is healing trust, which is often broken in so many relationships because preceding that has been lies, secrecy, and damaged trust. And that can take a long time too. Yeah.
Fun stuff.
What percentage would you say make it and survive addiction? Why do you think people do not share their misery? What I can say about addiction is a statistic that is kind of summarized in a lot of papers is between 40 and 60% of people after completing treatment, and by that could mean residential treatment, but it could also mean an intensive outpatient program, some sort of treatment episode, 40 to 60% will relapse in the first year. And that's a pretty pooled statistic. I mean, that's not broken down by all sorts of other factors. But the longer you can maintain sobriety, the odds of relapsing go way down. So if somebody can string together 5 years of sobriety, it doesn't mean they could never relapse again. It certainly does and has happened, but the chances go down. So the goal of treatment, whatever that looks like, is to keep, and even in AA, they'll say 1 day at a time, and you're trying to accumulate days. It's acquiring days of sobriety and then months and then years is the goal to minimize the chances of relapse. And I fortunately, I want to share some hope that I've worked with many people who have done well and have found a path. That path can be so variable, what it looks like and maybe how many relapses before they figure it out, but there is hope, and the goal is, again, just keep reconnecting with treatment. Why do you think people do not share their misery?
I love sharing my misery. I don't know why people don't share their misery. I find it to be deeply refreshing. I mean, it's scary to put. Being vulnerable is scary. I feel like I started doing theater when I was 3 years old. You know, I mean, like my entire. I think like there was permission in our house to be sort of. And Harris, if you hear him on any podcast, he was a prolific podcaster. He also was very open about everything. But it's hard, I think, if you're in a normal job, maybe like you're not, like an artist or, you're in some corporate, I don't know. I mean, there's different rules in different environments. And, but I do think that it's helpful, to be honest.
It
personally.
Sounds like his work environment was generally accommodating
Very
and supportive.
much. Very
That's
much.
Probably not the case in, many work environments.
Yeah.
And and depending on your family dynamic
Right.
as well.
I mean, yeah, if you're in a creative, my parents realized when we were very young, like we've got two bizarre children, we're going to have to let them be weird,
Creative types.
And that was our experience. But yeah, it's probably not as easy for everyone to open up about their struggles. But it would be great if we all did.
And did he share about how it impacted his work, aside from when he would have to go into treatment? Just on a daily...
No.
He seemed to be somehow creative through it.
So he, like all addicts, like he was dropping some balls. He was late. He was taking time off. His boss was Mike Schur, who's an amazing, wonderful human being, in addition to being the showrunner of every show that we love, The Office, The Good Place, Parks and Rec, And I said to him at some point, I'm like, how did he keep his job? I don't understand, And he said, because he was funny. He was like the funniest guy and charming. And, Mike would give him, Harris was like, I need to go to treatment. And Mike was like, go. We'll see you when you get back. I mean, he was great about that. But yeah, I don't know. It seems like everybody's job wouldn't be as accommodating to that sort of thing,
Exactly. I think we've made it through the questions.
We made it, guys.
Yeah. So.
I'd like to thank Stephanie and Larissa. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stephanie, for sharing your story and just sharing the tragedy of losing your brother and how you have overcome and dealt with your daughter and naming your son after your brother. And thank you for sharing all that. And
thank you for having me.
Larissa, thank you for sharing all your knowledge and expertise. I just have one final question. You know, when we did another program on addiction, when we screened Beautiful Boy, there was some question about how do you know that a treatment program is a legitimate, evidence-based treatment program, because we all see the ads on television about the beautiful place in Malibu, come and get
Harris
treated.
went there.
And so I'm just wondering, you know, for people that are dealing with this issue, what criteria can you use to judge a facility where you want, you know, where you think your loved one will get good care?
Yes, that's a great question. There is a book that tries to address this issue called Clean by David Sheff. Talks about navigating the treatment system, but definitely want to see clinically licensed people and quite a lot of them on the staff, meaning people with psychology degrees, licensed social work degrees, MDs, who are guiding the treatment. And do they integrate psychiatric treatment, medication management, in addition to not just process groups and yoga and sitting by the beach, which are all very comfortable, but what kind of group therapy are they doing, and what does the program look like, and what do they do to link people to care after they leave? And I would say in the case of the real controversy comes, or where you'll see a lot of discrepant philosophies, as residential programs who are not accepting of medication treatment for opioid addiction in particular. The idea that, oh, you're not sober if you're on medication. I completely disagree with that, and I would not send a loved one to a program that did not accept and encourage and inform people. It's scary to leave a program and not have even had that informed discussion about what is the best evidence for treatment that is available, and so knowing that they provide and encourage and support. Also, you know, do they leave with a naloxone prescription, which is for overdose prevention? That's now really encouraged. So these are some of the questions you can ask.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here this evening. You have a chance to buy, if you have not already bought a copy of Stephanie's book, she'll be out in the foyer signing them. Please join us for future Open Mind events, friends of the Semel Institute.org, and thank you very much.